I'm taking it personally that we've been moved to the very end of the day after doing this in Sydney, which to be honest makes sense. We should probably do this over drinks. The alternative title for this was Old Men Shout at Cloud after the performance in Sydney, and you'll see why in a second. We'll move on the slide. So yes, the hat is surgically attached to my head, which is why it appears that way in all of the pictures. Rishu's the only one who actually knows how anything works, so he's going to be doing the demo and all the cool stuff that you'll actually want to see. I'm here largely to shout at things. So a little bit about me. JC, founder at Lightfold. I spent some time running things at a GSI and then ran screaming into the darkness because we felt like data was going in a very, very different direction about 5 years ago. We've always kind of looked at data differently at Lightfold because we spent the first part of our career trying to deal with a thing called Salesforce and it being rolled out as part of the cloud revolution that swept the world. And I used to joke that I was one of the highest paid change consultants in the world because I'd get flown all over the place to deal with $10 million digital transformation projects that were going completely sideways because somebody forgot the data, right? We've had this, we think, kind of Copernican moment. Ooh, Copernican, triple word score, where everyone has kind of believed that the center of the universe are apps, right? We have an app for everything. Apologies to the CIOs in the room, but the moment you get a new job, the first thing you do is say, we're going to change these apps, and we're going to go buy these apps because these apps were great for us. Like app. And if you're in this room and you live in data engineering, you're probably very frustrated about one thing that boils right down. And we'll say that it's about conventions, and we'll say it's about upper and lower case, and we'll say it's about whether you're Kimball or Inmon, but really, it's about money. It's about the fact that you just don't seem to get any budget. And don't they understand how hard you work and how valuable the work is? And why do they keep giving all the money to marketing and sales and service? I'm going to try and explain that to you, right? One, they've had 10 years selling apps that get that money, and that's what has powered this massive cloud explosion. But two, the guys who sell those apps understood something really, really important. They understood that in the private sector, the way you get money is to make money. So our thesis is this. The problem is they buy these apps because they get told this app will sell more, market more, service more. It will hyper-personalize your backward overflow, whatever it is, right? And they spend a fortune and they whack it in. And then there's this phase right at the end of the implementation marked migration. Yes, that magical thing that's going to be real easy to do because we're just going to load CS. You know it's true. See the laughter? You're like, yes, that's what happens. It's what happens, right? And then I rock up and I say things like, yeah, great idea. But this was transformational. Like, yes, it was very transformational. Absolutely. We've completely redefined our customer. Oh, I can see that. It used to be 1 table and now it's 7. That's called a grain impedance mismatch. Do you know what that does? I didn't understand any of the words you said. I'm too rich. Cool. What it means is that we can't do the migration because you've completely changed the underlying data model and you're screwed. It's going to cost you about another $2 million, right? The data is hard. The data is heavy. All right, at the risk of showing just how much of a geek I am, I'm going to quote the Denis Villeneuve movie coming out and say, he who can destroy a thing controls a thing, right? Data destroys more multi-million-dollar digital transformation programs than any other factor because people didn't understand it's heavy and it's hard and it's actually the thing that you're waiting to use at the end. So our argument is the data is the center, the data is the heavy bit, and not just any data. So, dot point number 2, customer data. I was taught by people who, and I'm not kidding here, would genuinely have picked me up by my pants and thrown me over that balcony if I had put into a production system the following words, select asterisks. You all know it, I know you know it, I know there's people in this room who probably still want to throw me over the balcony, right? Now, I get it. We're now dealing with colossal MPP systems, massively parallel processing systems. It's amazing. First time I turned on Snowflake, I went, okay, I need to start a new business because this is incredible. I've never seen anything like it, right? However, it doesn't change the fact that there is good code, there is good modeling, there is good informatics based on maths, and the maths haven't changed. So I am unabashedly from the school where I say, I don't care how much you like Python. I like Python too. I don't care how much you like data frames. I like data frames too. Maths is maths, SQL is SQL, it's based on set theory, and 40 years of mathematical endeavor does not care about how trendy your new app is, right? And that's this whole conversation people are having about data modeling is dead or it isn't dead. drives me a little bit up the wall, because the fact that you may not write the same SQL statement, the fact that you may not commit the same dimension table, does not mean that we do not do dimensional modeling. They are two different things. One is the logical implementation, one is the conceptual implementation. And we still need to understand those concepts in order to do the third dot point, which I'm coming to. Why is the customer data so important? Answer, you're in business. I told you that you're all sad because you don't get any money. Here's what you take away from today, how you fix that to get the money you need for all the cool toys you saw today. Any business starting will only continue if it affects a sale. Imagine that. Imagine your day one of a lemonade stand. What do? You turn on, obviously you turn on your full modern data stack, of course, and you then proceed to capture the fact that you've sold 1 cup of lemonade, right? That's the starting point. Absolutely every single other data point in the business, I contend, is never more than about 8 hops away from the customer one way or another. If it is, I'll show you something that will probably be taken out of your business very shortly, because it won't be seen as core business, right? That's actually good architecture of the business, never mind the data model. Now, if that's a reasonable thing to assume, just press fast forward. Just press fast forward and the business doesn't go out of business. What happens? It accretes, right? All of the data that's captured as you continue to not go out of business or not get taken to jail, hopefully, right? All ultimately will be traced back to the fact that you sold more stuff and you kept selling stuff and that you structured that around what you sold, who you sold it to, where you sold it, right? So the customer is actually naturally a center point, very literally, especially in the private sector, but I would argue that this also happens in Government 2.0, where they'll talk about citizen as customer. Similar type of thing. This is not my idea. Refer previous comment about dudes who would have thrown me off a balcony. This is a 40-year-old idea. It's called customer-centric data modeling. That's all it is. And it's because when we first started doing data models in cool things called databases, which were invented, right, that were pretty funky actually when Oracle first made one, we weren't focused on that. We were focused on taking big things called mainframes and dumping their data somewhere where we could play with it without burning a hole in the ground. They literally blew up if you wrote select star. And those systems were transactionally centric. They were focused on controlling transactions worth a lot of money, right? So a lot of the early data models, very, very focused on this, and the customer was in there, was often this idea of like, oh, it's a dimension alongside absolutely everything else, right? But there were people who said, is that true though? If we're trying to model the ontology, ooh, another triple word score, of what's happening in the business, maybe the customer should be what we're using as the central anchor, right? What I'm saying to all of you, if you want to understand why Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z, the wealthiest people you're possibly ever going to meet, the people who actually own half the stack we're talking about and are making the $10, $100 billion bets into each of these platforms. If you want to understand why they are doing that, it's one reason. They fundamentally believe, and there's a quote from them, that all of the apps of the last 10 years are going to be re-architected on top of the data stack. And they're going to do that because of personalization. That is the word. My contestation is that the massive, we're talking huge investment going into the modern data stack is being driven by the fact that we've convinced every marketer, every strategist, that the way you compete in the modern environment is with this idea of hyper-personalization. We sold them a whole bunch of tools, things that do orchestration, things that send messages, things that send texts. And if you've ever seen one of those demos, they look great. Whiz bang, click a whole bunch of buttons and I'm gonna send you an email when your dog buys some food and it's also a Virgo or something, right? But no one ever stops to go, where are the data points that tell us the star sign of the dog and how much food it bought? How are we doing that? Where's that coming from? It's coming from the data layer. Every one of them is a custom query. You're going to have to somehow get them performantly to the tool that's doing the messaging. How are you going to do that? And I can tell you from experience, for the last 6 years, that's the point where the CMO cries, gets out a checkbook, does a $2 million change request, and builds a whole bunch of point-to-point integrations with the data warehouse. And they're so sick of it that what they've realized is actually what we need the stack to start providing us readily, performantly, at scale, insight, micro insight into the customer, because I need to sell to them, I need to talk to them, I need to service them, I need to anticipate their outcomes, right? Just to further round it out. This means that if you imagine, we've got a whole application space now. We've got all these apps, We're good little DevOps people. How am I going? I just have to watch this because I get that if the ranting goes too far, people throw things at me. Orbiting this core of data, there's this app space where you're buying all these apps, you're doing good DevOps practice, they're containerized, they can talk to each other, right? But the problem is every single one of these apps, to my point before, doesn't have the whole picture and it needs it. So as you start to want to personalize with MarTech, as you start to want to understand the profitability of a customer in your invoice system, when you start to want to understand DIFOT sensitivity in your logistics system, you don't have all of the data at that point. So how do you get it there? As they start to implement this higher and higher focus on quality, on differentiation of service, they become hungry for very specific, customer-specific data points. How do they get it? Now, here's the problem. Here's the big issue with this, which, again, the people in the room who were taught by the same people who taught me, you already know. We had a thing called OLAP and OLTP, and these were never allowed to cross. There is a reason for this. It was because you would melt a $2 million rack of tin into the ground. That's why. That is the only reason. The reason why the two things were not mixed has to do with physical limits of architecture, and there were very good reasons. Make no mistake, we are in the middle of that wall crashing down. Every provider, Snowflake has Unistore, right, is rushing to the gate where they can say, we now have a table that can happily do both of those things forever and do it economically and scalably. And the reason that is happening is because everyone has cottoned on to this fact. What I'm actually asking you for is not a data point from a system of record. It's an analytical insight. It's an aggregate. It's a question answered. It's a prediction. It's something powered from an analytical process, a data engineering process that is now fundamental to what the CMO has told the board their entire go-to-market strategy is going to be. This is where your money is, people. If you want to get funded, change the way you think about the modern data stack. This is how we tell everybody how to think about it, really, really simply. Imagine it's got 3 layers: replicate, transform, mobilize. You know, like an in-mon data warehouse. Sorry, I have to get the boot in every time I can. There's nothing actually that adversarial about that idea, but we just change some of the thinking about what each of these layers is trying to do. The thing I want to draw all your attention to is the little dots coming out of the top, right? Another thing that executives love spending money on, machine learning. We love machine learning, don't we? Right? It's a query. Fight me. Segment messaging. It's a query. Graphs. It's a query. They're all queries, people. One of the things, if you want to buy a feature store, again, I told you it was going to be rants. This is why we should do drinks, right? You want to buy a feature store, hot new product in town? I have no problem. You go for it because it means I've won. I tried to tell people I was doing machine learning in genetics 20 frickin' years ago. You don't get to write good machine learning models unless you absolutely understand what every single column in your data set is. Otherwise, you can't verify your statistical outcome. You know what that is? Structured data. It means that any ML ops at scale needs to structure the data. The fact that they want to investigate unstructured data is one point. But as they scale, they don't want to do that every time, right? And so we have this new product called a feature store that is basically a data warehouse for data scientists. For me, it's the ultimate failure statement of the hype of the last 10 years that we can just chuck out structure. And it proves to me that no matter what you're doing, whether it's machine learning or whether it's segment messaging, everyone winds up coming back to a place of governed data. And governed data, as we'll see in a moment, means structure. I've got 4 minutes before I hand it to you, but I know you always just like, keep going, I don't want to do the demo. If we don't do the demo, they all tear me apart. So what I try to tell people is mobilize means more than graphs. Just say the word mobilize. We're mobilizing the data. Why? It makes you money. I've been trying to convince boards for 10 years. Data is a revenue center. If it looks like a cost center, that's how badly you're doing it. It's a revenue center. Because by definition, if you're not using your crappy data for competitive advantage, your competitors are. It should fundamentally be a resource you are harnessing to compete. This whole CDP thing, right? Oh God. Can someone please stop the marketers from naming technology? Why customer data platform? What is that even? This whole space exists to help mobilize data to those apps. That's all a CDP is doing. It's sucking data out of wherever it already has been structured to help power all the personalization we were talking about. So there's a whole product category now just devoted to this idea. The warehouse isn't static. So this is the beautiful bit. It's not just ranting. This is actually the reason, as I'll get to in a second, I started Lightfold. Snowflake for me is the pick of the bunch. I'm sorry, I can argue about why mathematically that is the case. But whatever, I know there's other things in the market too. But regardless, what we're able to do with these massively scalable platforms is incredible. Absolutely incredible. The idea that we have a global data grid, replicated across 3 public cloud systems, this is science fiction mumbo jumbo, like 15 years ago. It's crazy. And now we're just taking it for granted. So it really should challenge us fundamentally to actually rethink architectures. I am here to rethink architectures. I'm not here to pretend that math doesn't work anymore and that we can ignore all the hard-won lessons of the last 50 years of data modeling, right? And then the last one is trying to get these poor people in digital to realize that they've wasted millions of dollars on point-to-point integrations when they could have just done data replication, because you don't need to know that the dog bought food and is a Virgo in 500 milliseconds. We probably could have just synced that in a DBT job or whatever, Coalesce job in 15 minutes. Whew, that was a slip. In 15 minutes, and that would have been fine. But the thing which is really, really important for me, is what happens when you see this all working. And this was the bit where I decided, okay, I've got to start Lightfold, right? I'm going to show my age here with a quote from Hunt for Red October. There's a bit in Hunt for Red October where they're like, what is that noise? What is that sound? And then they speed it right up. It goes, chung, 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 chung. They go, it's got to be man-made, right? This thing is compiling every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 30 minutes. That's another thing that the OLAP, OLTP world could never have imagined. We were trying to make sure it didn't blow up every 24 hours. When this thing is moving like that, it's like a heart, right? This thing is actually acting as a flow point for the business's data. And that, I think, is how people are starting to see the modern data stack, is that it's not about creating a single source. You can't. The data is in motion. Try building a single source for a truly global company. The speed of light will argue with you. I've tried to do it. It'll tell you can't do it. It's in flow. But what is possible is we can have a central system that monitors that flow, just like the heart. And the crazy bit is this. The data now provides a prediction. The prediction comes out the top. The person changes what they do. And the fact that they did that winds up back in the database 15 minutes later. And it changes the next prediction. That's crazy. It's crazy town. That's not what warehouses were originally invented for. But that's exactly what people are starting to use them for. And when you view it that way, what we're really saying is that's getting closer to the customer. This is a strategic investment to get the entire business closer to the customer. You say that to your boss, you say that to your CEO, you say that to your board, you watch the conversation change about your budget allocation. I guarantee it, because that is literally what you're trying to do. I'm going to tell my joke, and then I'm going to hand it to you. They thought, what, he has more jokes? He does, he has one. Right, because I have to rant. Yes, okay, Coalesce, Snowflake. I think this is literally the key to everything, as you'll see in a second. I wish, God, if I had Coalesce 10 years ago, that would have made such a difference. But as you can see in a moment, it does exactly what you expect it to do. It's going to have a directed acyclic graph. It's going to do code automation. It's going to help us bring structure. It's all about structure. Structure, structure, structure. So why is John talking about structure? Well, he has a joke. What's this a picture of, ladies and gentlemen? IKEA! You guys go faster than the other guys. It's IKEA. It's a big warehouse. Now, you imagine having the guts to rock up to these guys in particular and going, IKEA, mate. No, you're doing it all wrong. About 10 years ago. You don't need any of this stuff, mate. This is not how you do it. I've got a way to just save you so much money on how you are storing all this stuff. You ready? Here we go. So what I do, start off with, you got your Calyx, right? Your Calyx. Calyx is the only one I know because I've put my board games in it, so I always refer to Calyx. I'm sure they sell other things, but I've got 14 of those. So you get Calyx, right? And you're going to have a meat mincer. Really big one, right? Now stay with me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed the Calyxes, right, through that into this really big, and I say fairly priced, pot, right? You just going to feed them through like that. Absolutely everything. Whole warehouse, put it through the chipper, no whackers, and check it out. That's the whole warehouse now. Aren't I clever? It's this big jug. Problem solved. Saved your square meterage. And the problem is that the bloke in the high-vis goes, yeah, look, cool, dig it, big bucket, but where's my Calyx at, mate? And you go, oh, here, no, fair call, no whackers at all. So it's got this really expensive little spout, right, nifty thing, and I'm going to rock up with my bucket. And here we go, ready? And That'll do it. Yep. There's your calyx. This is a metaphor about the data lake movement, in case you were wondering. So what's the problem with that? Where you're sitting there going, right, there's your calyx, mate, right? Well, you all know it. The calyx does not equal a bucket full of the atoms of the calyx. There are 3 fundamental parts of the universe: matter and energy and the shape that they are in, information, right? By destroying structure, we do get some pretty huge advantages about how we can move it, how we can work with it, how fast it is. But to literally try and tell me that it has no value is missing the entire damn point. In fact, the challenge, now that we've unlocked this incredible speed, is to figure out new architectures to do old-fashioned things. We have got to try and provide rigor in how we establish that structure much faster than our forebears ever had to, because the business is going to rely on it more than they ever had. It's not going to be just powering the end of quarter report. It's powering the next sale, it's powering the website, it's powering the prediction, it's powering automated trades, right? So now more than ever, we have to go beyond, blend it all down into a lake. We have to talk about structure. And at that point, you start to say things like, so what if I had structure in a pipe? What if I put structure in a pipe? I could have the best of both worlds. And that's where I say, check out Coalesce. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. That's fucking amazing. Too much pressure. It's already 4:50. I'm just standing between you and the beer, and after that. So I got exactly 7 minutes, which is more than enough time, to talk about Coalesce. What I'm going to do is really quickly run through the product, but also talk about some philosophies on which this product is based on. First of all, this product is built only for Snowflake. It's a data transformation product, code automation product, built on ops capabilities, right? So that you cannot work on this product if DevOps is not what you want to do, right? So it has to be, the DevOps has to be core of your pipelines. What I'm doing right now is quickly reading some metadata from Snowflake. At this point in time, I'm not bringing any data. So another philosophy of Coalesce is that we do not bring and store any data in Coalesce at rest. You can absolutely run some stuff, but nothing comes back and stays in Coalesce ever. Everything is 100% pushed down because that's where the power of Snowflake comes in. The other philosophy is speed. So you want to quickly build structure, you want to build models. We have something called architecture patterns and best practices. This is what we bring to Snowflake Cloud Data Warehouse.
Sorry, could you say that again? What the architecture pattern and best practices? There's a takeaway.
Yes.
That in the modern data stack very well.
So the best practice is not just naming conventions, storage conventions, but also the patterns around data engineering pipelines. Anything in data engineering, arguably, is a pattern. You're building a pattern and you're just repeating that pattern across multiple use cases, right? So in this case, I want to create a stage because all my source nodes are read-only. I can quickly go and select them all, right-click, add node, and these are the patterns I'm talking about. If you look at the pattern here, we have the customer. This is what you interact with. And this is where it's actually the third philosophy is consistency and scalability. Anybody who's driving the keyboard is actually going to be adhering to the standards because you're using these patterns, right? So in this case, we have stage. All my stage nodes were stg_. And you can see that I have these options, and these options are 100% customizable. They change based on the node type that you select. The next thing is transformations. You can bring in as easy or as complicated transformations that you want to do. In this case, I'm just quickly going to do an uppercase for my source columns. You can preview your results. Everything looks good. Just update. Right? That's what we have quickly done here. Every node has a testing framework that is built into it. So your DQ, data quality testing, you can define some basic column level testings. You can check for nullability or uniqueness, or you can create as complex test case as you want, and then decide what you want to do if the test case fails. And then that would drive how the pipelines are going to work. So in Coalesce, what you're seeing here is we are building a DAG. This is developer experience only. I would quickly also take one more example where we go and build a dimension node. And just to show that we now have brought in standards. So we have added system columns. They're all going to be named system underscore. So imagine your data platform, your data warehouse, any model that you're going to build is going to have standards and best practices there. It has surrogate key. If you want, you can create your own hash keys. And the options have changed. You can create this as a table or a view. Typically, it's going to be a table. You would define a business key. And then very quickly, I'm going to go and create a SCD2, but only when my name, address, and phone number changes. Now, this is a non-trivial requirement. You want to go and write a code for that? Absolutely, you can do that. It's going to take hours. But what Coalesce does is, because it's a pattern, it has actually created and generated. So code automation comes here. You can quickly see that it has generated a standard pattern. Now, if the business user is using this, they would generate the same kind of code, right? And it has a pattern for what happens to the new rows, what happens to existing rows, what is that you're going to do for the new row, create a new one, and just like that, 200 lines of code. So you can imagine how quickly you can go and start building your data warehouse and dimensional model. And the other thing that we did not talk about is all the other node types, which is you have data vault node types, you have ML-powered functions. That was just announced by Snowflake. You have node types for dynamic tables, for streams and tasks. If there is a pattern, there is a node type, or you can build your own, because these are all 100% customizable. Eventually, you're going to build something like this, right? It's going to look like a dimensional model. You have dimensions and stages and facts and everything. And then you're going to go and create a job out of it. So very quickly, you can just define your job interface, how you want to actually go and process the objects that you have created. This is not just the dependencies, but also the hierarchy in which the objects are going to get executed when you're running these as jobs. But again, this is just the developer interface. You would have to go and use Git. There is no way you can work with Coalesce to deploy anything in higher environments. With Git, you can also see all the changes that you have made and quickly visually eyeball if you're actually working with existing assets. If it's a new one, it's a new object, you would see that as well. And you would quickly just define your comments and just checking the changes. And once the changes are done, this is where the deployment comes in. But even before I talk about deployment, let's be realistic. Your data warehouse or your object is actually going to look something like that. It's not going to be as simple as what you saw earlier, right? And this is where one of the core requirements, once you have those models that are built into the product, is change management and understanding when something that changes, what is the impact of the change down the pipeline. And this is where the power of lineage comes in as well. So you can very quickly and very easily look at the lineage across the objects, and you can totally see how that particular column is created. So if you're making a change, you can also see the objects, not only downstream, but also upstream, how they're changing, right? Once you're happy with all the changes, you can actually go and start deploying them. Deployment is through CLI and API only. And that would also go and read your checked-in branch from your Git repository. And that's hence the reason I said, you can probably create objects, but you absolutely cannot do any CD. This is just a very quick way of eyeballing your work, right? So last 20 deployments for DDLs, last 20 deployments for runs across all the DML jobs, but also across the environments. We can talk about how data mesh architectures can be built using this, but we don't have enough time for that. Last but not least, every single run would actually give you an ECF framework. So it's going to tell you what happened at what point in time for every single object, and it'll tie it back to number of rows inserted, updated, deleted, along with the warehouse that was used and the query ID. So if something fails, we would return the failure point and failure code from Snowflake, and we'll provide it to you along with the query ID so you can look at that. And also, there's documentation. This documentation is all live. It's all getting generated at the point when you are looking at the documentation for that particular environment. So if there's a change that is made, you would see that change here. And this is how most of the business users might be looking at the product. And you would be able to see the lineage across the objects, and not just the object, but also column level, and also the code that got generated through that particular lineage. I'm actually out of time. Nobody's
I think we're
kicking me out
slightly over
today.
time, but I mean, I'm waiting to see if the guy in the sparkle blazer
Yeah, I was
will
like-
actually tackle you. He threatened it in Sydney. I think if I
We
can
did
just
have
make-
this. We had this conversation in Sydney. That
We
I
did.
made.
We did.
Yeah,
I tackle.
I want to see if you'll
Almost.
actually do it.
Almost there.
The thing I want to just point out, guys, is just in closing, right? That picture right there of the lineage, it's because each individual element, each field, is effectively in a metadata wrapper. So when I said you've got structure inside the pipe, the problem is that the pipes are not structure aware. They're just chunks of code that are being kind of looped together by loose dependency associations. What's happening here is best practice data warehouse automation from the last 25 years. It's just happening in the cloud. Every single element is a metadata declaration, which can then compile into structured code. So if you hate GUIs, I hate GUIs too, right? This thing is a code compiler. It's not someone's proprietary GUI that you're now stuck in. It's a way to then always still be writing SQL and best practice SQL. And the reason it can see that lineage is because it treats each individual atom of the data as important. And it wants to understand where it came from and how its structure changed over time. So yeah, we love it. Lightfold, that's why we get here and talk about this. My entire team just asked us, can we just please always use this forever? And if you've ever had to manage data warehousing or anything like it, I'm sure you can already see the advantages. If you want to see it in more detail, he'll probably be half cut, but you can come and grab us for a demo afterwards. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you so much.